Opening scene, a busy church entrance. A desperate woman reaches toward a man in a suit. "Pastor, please, my husband lost his job. The children haven't eaten since yesterday. I just need a little help." Pastor Emmanuel, without stopping. "Poverty is a spirit, and until you rebuke it, no one can help you. Don't bring that energy into my atmosphere." The morning air in Gracefield was sweet with birdsong, but inside the marble corridors of Sovereign Glory Ministries, the air smelled only of cologne and ambition. Pastor Emmanuel Ador stepped out of his chauffeur-driven black Range Rover with the ease of a man who had never once questioned his own goodness. His cufflinks caught the sunlight. His handshake, practiced and firm, was always ready for cameras, but rarely for tears. A personal assistant trailed behind him with a tablet, scheduling his next television interview. Emmanuel was not merely a pastor, he was a brand, a movement, a carefully constructed image of divine favor built on a foundation no one had dared examine too closely. He walked past the food bank volunteers without acknowledging them, past the broken water fountain the maintenance team had been begging to fix for 8 months, past the handwritten prayer requests pinned to the notice board, prayers he would never personally read. Then a small voice stopped him. It was Brother Amos. His back was bent from decades of carrying chairs and sweeping floors before any service began. He had served the church since Emmanuel was still in seminary. His hands were calloused. His faith was unshakable. "Pastor," Amos said softly, removing his cap, "my daughter, she has been in the hospital for 2 weeks now. The bills are mounting. I know the church has a welfare fund. I was wondering if perhaps—" Emmanuel placed a slow, deliberate hand on the old man's shoulder and looked not at him, but slightly past him, toward the camera crew filming a behind-the-scenes ministry documentary. "Brother Amos," he said, his voice warm and theatrical, "God is not moved by your need, he is moved by your faith. If your daughter is still sick, perhaps the family has not yet unlocked the level of sacrifice that releases heaven's intervention. Bring a sacrificial offering this Sunday, a seed of 1,000 naira, no, make it 5,000, and watch what the Lord will do." He gave Amos's shoulder one final squeeze and walked away. Amos stood in the hallway long after the footsteps faded. He had given 40 years to that church. He had painted its walls twice. He had carried the founder's casket when Emmanuel's predecessor passed. And now he was being told that his daughter's suffering was a problem of insufficient payment. He did not know that the welfare fund, contributed to faithfully by members each month, was under Emmanuel's sole signatory authority and had not been touched for its intended purpose in over a year. Inside his private office, a room no ordinary member was permitted to enter, Emmanuel sat across from his personal secretary Priscilla. The room was appointed with soft leather, a wine cooler, and a wall-mounted screen showing his social media follower count in real time. On the mahogany desk sat a leather-bound ledger, not a prayer journal, a business ledger. "How much came in from last Sunday's special offering?" Emmanuel asked, and Priscilla slid a paper across the desk. Emmanuel's eyes moved quickly down the column of numbers. A small smile formed. "The widows gave well," he murmured, almost to himself. "Suffering makes people generous." He initialed 3 transfers, one toward a beachfront property investment in his own name, one to cover the lease on a car he had secretly purchased for Priscilla, and one labeled simply Leadership Development that went to a private account only he could access. The people believe they are building a legacy, and they are, just not theirs. He laughed quietly. Priscilla laughed too. Neither of them noticed the office intercom light blinking, the one connected to the administrative block next door, where a young accountant named Nkechi had accidentally left her headset on while she organized old financial files. She sat very still, listening, her pen frozen above her notepad. 3 weeks later, Emmanuel announced a special convocation he called the Covenant of 1,000. The premise was simple and terrifying. God had spoken to him in a vision, he declared. A great calamity was approaching Gracefield: sickness, loss, unspeakable misfortune. But those who sowed 1,000 into the ministry's emergency protection fund within 72 hours would be covered, their homes would be shielded, their children would be safe. The announcement spread through the congregation like wildfire through dry grass. Brother Amos heard the message on the church radio while sitting beside his daughter's hospital bed. He looked at his phone. His account balance was 412 naira. He looked at his daughter's face, pale and exhausted against the white pillow. He thought of the pastor's words, "The seed releases heaven's intervention."
He called his younger brother and borrowed the money. He sent every naira to the church's payment number before midnight. He didn't know that Emmanuel was, at that exact hour, finalizing a hotel reservation for a private retreat, not a prayer retreat, but a 3-day personal vacation with Priscilla, funded entirely by that same emergency protection offering. Emmanuel believed he was untouchable. He had constructed a theology entirely around himself, a theology where questioning the man of God was equivalent to questioning God, where the congregation's doubts were rebuked as faithlessness, and where his own wealth was presented as proof of divine endorsement. He had turned the gospel into a mirror, and the only face it reflected was his own. But the God he preached about, the one who sees in secret, who hears the cry of the oppressed, who measures the heart rather than the suit, was not the God Emmanuel actually believed in. He believed in nothing but momentum, and momentum eventually runs out. It was Nkechi who moved first. She had said nothing for 3 weeks. She had carried the weight of what she knew like a stone pressed against her chest. She had prayed. She had wept. She had nearly convinced herself it was not her place. But then she watched Amos arrive at the hospital one afternoon with nothing to eat, having spent his borrowed money on a pastor's vacation he would never know about. And something in her resolved. She had quietly been making copies, receipts, transfer records, bank statements, audio notes from the day her headset had been left on. She organized everything into a clear, dated file and walked into the office of the church's board of trustees, a body Emmanuel had long neglected and underestimated. The board met in emergency session that Friday night. By Sunday morning, they were seated in the front row. Emmanuel walked onto the stage expecting the usual reception, the music, the applause, the sea of upturned faces hungry for his words. He got the music. He did not get the rest. As he opened his Bible, the board chairman rose and walked calmly to the second microphone. What followed was not a spectacle. There was no shouting, no dramatic collapse, just a quiet, careful laying out of facts. Figures read aloud, dates confirmed, accounts traced. The congregation sat in complete silence. Some wept, some stared at the floor. Some looked at Emmanuel's face, searching for the denial that never came clearly enough. The police liaison officer seated at the back rose to his feet. Emmanuel's eyes swept the room for allies. The wealthy members in the front rows, men and women he had lavished with private dinners and public recognition, were already reaching for their bags. In the weeks that followed, the building stood locked while authorities conducted their investigation. But something unusual happened. The people did not scatter. Nkechi opened her small apartment to anyone who needed a place to pray. Amos came, his daughter, now recovering, beside him. The food bank volunteers who had never been acknowledged came. The choir members who had served without pay came. The widows who had given their last savings came, not with bitterness, though they had every right to it, but with a quiet determination to remember what they had originally gathered for. They prayed together, they shared meals, they were honest with each other about their hurt, and slowly, carefully, they began again, not around a personality, not around a building, not around a brand, but around something Emmanuel had never actually offered them: truth. Brother Amos, on one of those evenings, said something no one forgot. A shepherd who feeds himself from the flock is not a shepherd. He is a wolf who learned to wear robes, and we must stop being surprised when wolves bite. This story is a warning. There are men and women in positions of spiritual authority today who treat congregations as resources to be extracted rather than people to be served. They have mastered the language of heaven while pursuing the agenda of personal gain. They shame the poor for their poverty, honor the wealthy for their status, and construct elaborate theologies to protect themselves from accountability. If your leader cannot be questioned, that is not holiness, that is control. If your giving is always framed as the solution to your suffering, that is not faith, that is manipulation. If the man or woman at the front is visibly prospering while the people around them are visibly struggling, do not call that a testimony, call it what it is. A true servant leads with sacrifice, not spectacle. They are known not by the size of their platform, but by the integrity of their conduct when they believe no one is watching. And if you have been wounded by a leader like Emmanuel, if you gave your last, believed with everything you had, and were left with nothing but shame, know this: your faith was not foolish. You were simply placed in the hands of someone who was not worthy of it. That is their failure, not yours. The door back to genuine community is always open. It just rarely has a marble entrance. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have walked a road like this, tell us in the comments. You are not alone. This script covers the same thematic arc: the exploitative pastor, the faithful elderly servant, the naive giver, the secret sin, the unlikely whistleblower, the exposure, and the quiet rebuilding, with entirely fresh characters, scenes, dialogue, and narrative voice. Let me know if you'd like it adapted for video narration, shortened or adjusted in tone.